On a spring morning in Chicago, 1930, the hum of the city was broken by a silence that would last nearly a century. A 2-year-old girl, bright-eyed and full of laughter, vanished from her home without a trace. Her name was Mary Agnes Moroney, and her disappearance would become one of the oldest missing child cases in American history. What began as a simple act of kindness, a stranger offering help to a struggling family, would evolve into a mystery that haunted generations. The child's parents searched until their final days, never knowing what became of their little girl. But time, as it often does, kept its secrets well. Almost 100 years later, those secrets would finally begin to unravel. Through the power of DNA and the persistence of modern investigators, a story buried beneath decades of loss would rise again, bringing both closure and heartbreak to a family that had never stopped looking. Welcome to the Found Files, where the forgotten are remembered, where lost souls are given a voice, and where truth, no matter how long it hides, eventually finds its way to the surface. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Each week, we uncover the stories of the missing and the found, stories that remind us that justice may be delayed, but it's never fully denied. Because what happened to little Mary Agnes Moroney isn't just a story from the past. It's a wound in time, a wound that asks how a child could disappear so easily, and how a family could endure a lifetime of not knowing. We return to that quiet Chicago neighborhood, to a family on the edge of despair, to a knock at the door that would change everything. This is the story of Mary Agnes Moroney, the child who vanished in 1930, and was finally found, almost a century later. And as you listen, remember this: every missing child deserves to be searched for. Every voice silenced by time deserves to be heard. Don't just watch, be part of the search. Like, share, and subscribe to the Found Files, because every click, every share, every moment of awareness helps bring another story to light. There was just a family, young, hopeful, and trying to survive the hard edges of a changing world. In the late 1920s, Chicago pulsed with noise and ambition, but beneath the roar of industry and promise, the Great Depression was quietly taking shape. The city's working class was being stretched thin, and for families like the Moroneys, every day was a battle to stay afloat. 17-year-old Catherine Moroney was barely more than a child herself. Yet, she was already a wife and mother, doing her best to raise 2 little girls in a cramped apartment on Wentworth Avenue. Her husband, Michael, worked tirelessly, earning about $15 a week, just enough to keep food on the table, never enough to escape the shadow of poverty. Their eldest daughter, Mary Agnes, born on May 10, 1928, was the light of their home. She had wide brown eyes, soft curls, and a laugh that filled every corner of their small apartment. Her baby sister, Anastasia, was still in her mother's arms, a reminder that life, though difficult, was still moving forward. For Catherine, dreams were simple: to see her children grow up safe, to have a stable home, to feel the kind of security she had never known. For Michael, life was a daily grind, long hours of labor, short nights of rest, and the quiet pride of a father who would give anything for his family. Neighbors would later recall how devoted they were, a young couple doing their best against impossible odds. And in that modest little home, love existed in abundance, even when money did not. But poverty makes people vulnerable. It opens doors to trust when trust can be dangerous. And in a time when help from strangers could mean the difference between hunger and survival, one knock at the door could change everything. Mary's world, her toys, her mother's lullabies, her father's tired but tender smile, felt safe. Unshaken. Eternal in the way only childhood can be. But safety, as the Moroneys were about to learn, can vanish in the blink of an eye. Because on one quiet day in May of 1930, everything changed in a moment. It was the middle of May, 1930, spring in Chicago. The city was alive with the hum of streetcars and the scent of rain in the air. Inside a small apartment on Wentworth Avenue, the Moroney family's life unfolded as usual: laughter from little Mary Agnes, the cry of baby Anastasia, and the exhausted rhythm of survival. Then came the knock. On May 14th, a woman appeared at their door. She was well-dressed, neatly spoken, carrying herself with a kind of polished confidence that stood in stark contrast to the Moroneys' humble surroundings. She introduced herself as Julia Otis. She said she worked for a wealthy family who wished to help the poor, that she'd heard about Catherine's struggles and had come to offer assistance. For a young mother barely 17, already pregnant again and living in hardship, the woman's offer seemed like an answered prayer. Julia brought small gifts, baby clothes, food, the promise of a better tomorrow. She spoke softly, reassuringly, and with a tone that made Catherine feel seen, even safe. That night, Catherine told her husband about the visitor. Michael was skeptical but exhausted. In a world where kindness was rare, refusing help could mean losing more than pride, it could mean losing survival itself. The next day, May 15, 1930, the woman returned. She smiled warmly, complimented Mary's curls, and told Catherine that she wanted to take the little girl downtown to buy her new shoes and clothes. "Just for the afternoon," she said. "I'll bring her right back." Catherine hesitated. She was unsure, something about letting her daughter leave with a stranger felt wrong. But Julia was persistent, persuasive. She promised she'd only be gone for a few hours. Mary Agnes, sensing something wasn't right, began to cry. She clung to her mother's dress, tears wetting the fabric. But Catherine, worn down by fear, poverty, and hope, finally let go. She kissed her daughter's cheek, and watched as Julia Otis took her little girl by the hand and disappeared into the streets of Chicago. She would never see her again. That evening, Catherine waited. As daylight faded, she began pacing. Hours passed. The shadows grew long. Panic set in. The clock ticked toward midnight, and still, no sign of Julia. The next morning, a letter arrived. It was signed Julia Otis. The writer said she had taken Mary to California, that the child was safe, and that she would be returned soon. The tone was gentle, almost maternal, meant to calm a desperate mother's heart. Days later, a second letter came, this time from a woman calling herself Alice Henderson. She claimed to be Julia's cousin and warned that Julia was not in her right mind. But detectives would later notice something strange: the handwriting in both letters was nearly identical. The same loops. The same slant. The same deception. For Catherine and Michael, hope and horror twisted together. They wanted to believe their daughter was safe. They wanted to trust the words in those letters. But deep down, a dreadful silence told them the truth. The door had closed. The child did not come back. Within days, police were involved. The case spread through Chicago newspapers, the headlines pleading for clues. Neighbors were questioned. Leads were chased. But Julia Otis, whoever she really was, had vanished just as completely as Mary Agnes. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And eventually, the story faded from the front pages. But for the Moroney family, the waiting never ended. Every knock at the door carried a flicker of hope. Every child's face on the street brought back memories. And though the city moved on, for one mother and father, time froze on that day in May 1930, the day their little girl was taken by kindness that turned to betrayal. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned into years. And years, into lifetimes. For Catherine and Michael Moroney, the world never truly moved forward. Their daughter, little Mary Agnes, had vanished, leaving behind only a name, a photograph, and 2 haunting letters from strangers. Clippings from the Chicago Daily Tribune and Chicago Evening Post swirl across the screen. Reporters once filled pages with promises of tips and sightings, all leading nowhere. Detectives interviewed hundreds, searched train stations, orphanages, even city hospitals. But every lead collapsed into silence. As the Great Depression deepened, hope became harder to hold. The case went cold, buried beneath the weight of survival and sorrow. But for the Moroneys, the search never ended. Even after both parents passed away, Catherine at just 31, Michael years later, their surviving children carried that grief like an heirloom. Meanwhile, far away, another story was unfolding. A little girl, about the same age, with the same bright eyes, grew up under another name. Jeanette Burchard. born, or rather, reborn, into a new life that no one questioned. She was raised believing she belonged where she was. To her, there was no mystery. She lived a normal American life, went to school, became a nurse, married, had children, and died in 2003, loved by her family. There's no proof she ever knew she'd once been someone else, that her first name had been Mary. While the Moroneys mourned a child they'd never see again, Jeanette Burchard built a quiet life, the kind of life her birth parents might have dreamed of for her. 2 worlds. 1 truth. And that truth would remain buried, for nearly a century. Mary Agnes lived a lifetime, not as a missing child, but as someone else entirely. Yet her blood still carried her story, waiting patiently for science, and family, to find it. For nearly a century, the case of 2-year-old Mary Agnes Moroney remained one of Chicago's oldest unsolved kidnappings. But in 2023, a quiet revolution in science, genetic genealogy, would breathe life into a file once thought long closed. Inside the Cook County Sheriff's Office, the Missing Persons Project had begun re-examining forgotten cases using modern DNA techniques. Thousands of samples. Countless family trees. And then, one match caught a genealogist's eye. A distant relative, curious about her ancestry, had uploaded her DNA results to a commercial database. What she didn't know was that her simple test would unlock a 93-year-old mystery. The data connected back to a family line in Chicago, the Moroneys. Genealogists began tracing the strands. Branch by branch, name by name. At the end of that long lineage was a woman named Jeanette Burchard, a woman who had lived, loved, and died never realizing her connection to a child taken in 1930. For the first time, the impossible seemed possible. Could Jeanette and Mary Agnes be the same person? Could the Moroneys finally have their answer? After almost 100 years of silence, a thread appeared, one born of science, love, and persistence. The story that began with a knock at the door in 1930 was about to find its ending. The moment of truth had finally arrived. 93 years after a stranger's knock changed everything, DNA confirmed what generations of the Moroney family had only prayed for. The little girl taken in 1930 had lived a full life under another name. She was Jeanette Burchard. She had died in 2003, at the age of 75, a mother, a grandmother, a nurse. She had built a life completely unaware that she was once America's youngest missing child. Through genetic genealogy, scientists were able to link her descendants directly to the Moroney bloodline. The data was undeniable. The girl who vanished from a poor Chicago tenement during the Great Depression had lived, loved, and passed on her legacy, hidden in plain sight. But as the answers came, so did new questions. Authorities confirmed the DNA match was conclusive, yet her remains were never exhumed. And the woman who called herself Julia Otis was never found, never charged, her motives forever sealed in mystery. Was she part of a human trafficking ring? A desperate woman longing for a child? Or simply a manipulator who saw opportunity in poverty? We may never know. When the news broke, emotions ran high. Relief, heartbreak, and disbelief swept through 2 families joined by fate. For the Moroneys, descendants of Michael and Catherine, it was the closure they had chased for nearly a century. For Jeanette's daughter, Terry Arnold, it was a revelation that rewrote her family's entire history. Terry described feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. Her mother had lived a happy life, but beneath that joy, an untold story slept. A story of loss, survival, and unknowable beginnings. In 1930, she was called Mary Agnes. In life, she became Jeanette. And in death, she became the bridge between 2 families, proving that even when truth hides for 100 years, it never disappears. Though Mary Agnes, now known to the world as Jeanette Burchard, never lived to meet her birth family, the past found a way to bridge the gap time refused to close. Across phone lines, emails, and shared family photographs, the descendants of Michael and Catherine Moroney connected with Jeanette's children and grandchildren. They spoke not as strangers, but as family, bound by blood, separated by history, and reunited by truth. Each new conversation, each exchanged photograph, was a thread sewn into a torn tapestry of nearly a century. For Catherine and Michael Moroney, the door they closed on that spring morning in 1930 never truly shut. It stood open, waiting, aching, and echoing with questions that would outlive them both. And in 2023, those echoes finally came home. The joy of discovery met the ache of loss. The surviving Moroney relatives wept, not just for what had been found, but for what had been lost. The little girl they searched for had lived a good life, but the parents who loved her had died never knowing. Even now, questions linger like ghosts in the corners of history. Who was Julia Otis, the elegant woman with kind eyes and careful eyes? Was she the one who raised Jeanette? Or was she only the first link in a hidden chain of deception? Her letters, signed in shifting names, suggest planning, perhaps even desperation. But motive? That remains untold. Closure, in the world of missing persons, rarely arrives whole. It comes in fragments, in a DNA strand, in a name, in a truth unearthed too late for those who needed it most. The Moroneys finally had an answer, but not an ending. Because when a child is taken, time itself is stolen. And even when the truth returns, it never comes back untouched. Mary Agnes Moroney's story is not just about a child stolen away. It's about how poverty, trust, and desperation collided on one spring morning, and how that collision echoed through generations. It is a story of parents who never stopped searching, even as the world moved on. Of descendants who refused to let her name fade into the dust of forgotten files. And of science, modern, relentless, and miraculous, reaching across time to give truth a voice. Mary Agnes Moroney's story reminds us that even when decades pass, love does not. It waits, in old letters, in faded photos, in strands of DNA, until it finds its way home. If you've watched until this moment, thank you. Remember, missing people are not just cold case numbers. They are sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, stories waiting to be told. Imagine if it were your child, and almost a century slipped by before anyone knew the truth. Wouldn't you want someone to keep looking? Don't turn away. Join us in keeping their memory alive. Please, like this video if you believe every child deserves to be found. Share it so more people learn the names behind the mysteries. And subscribe to the Found Files, because your support ensures that no story stays buried, and no voice goes unheard. Though Mary Agnes was gone from her birth family for a lifetime, her DNA carried her home. And that homecoming, even across time, is proof that truth never dies. It only waits to be found.